Hello. Welcome to the September edition of the Azure Functions Community Standup. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Lily. I'm a PM on the Azure Functions team, and I'll be your host for today. With me here is my awesome colleague Matthew, who will be bringing you a lot of updates on the .NET side of things. So before we jump into this session today, I'll let him introduce himself quickly.
Yeah, I'm Matthew. I'm a PM on the Functions team. I cover host and .NET stuff.
Can we go to the next slide, please? All right. So before we kind of dive into .NET related things, we have updates in other areas I would like to call out here. The first is for our triggers and bindings. Starting from version 6 of the Azure Functions Event Hub extension, the max event batch size setting will be a higher default value. Right now it will be 100. And by making this default higher, average scenarios will see improvements in performance and lower costs since there will be fewer function executions. And for our Python developers, we now have general availability support of durable functions in the V2 programming model. You can find out about these announcements in our newsletter. And if you have any questions throughout the session, please leave them in the chat. If the content doesn't answer your question, we'll try to address as many as we can towards the end. And with that said, I'll let Matthew take over from here and bring us updates on .NET side of things.
Sounds good. Right. So yeah, mostly just going to be talking about some of the recent things that we've announced, sort of the state of .NET, talk through some of the roadmap plans. We'll have some, if there's any questions, feel free to in the chat. Glad to answer some of those. But this is kind of a roundup of some of the stuff that we've been doing. So I wanted to start actually by jumping over to a blog post that we put out that kind of outlines the roadmap. So this is the go-to for a lot of the information we're going to be talking about. I'll walk through it as we go, but if you want to read in more detail, this is the place to go. So there are two models of writing .NET functions. We have the in-process model, which we've had from the very beginning, and the more recent isolated worker model. The isolated worker model has been doing really well. It's significantly better in terms of reliability and bringing other features to customers. So we see a lot of really successful outcomes with it, but it hasn't been super applicable for all scenarios in full. That's changing. We've been doing a lot of work to really make sure that the isolated worker is meeting scenario needs. It's kind of covering things at a full parity. And so we're basically at the point where we think that is now achieved. There's a few things still happening, so it's not done. But most applications are actually in a position where the isolated worker model should address their needs. And so I want to talk through some of the features and things like that that we've been doing. This is sort of a long view of some recent work, but we certainly have language support. One of the nice things about the isolated worker model is the ability for you to retarget to different TFMs as they become available. That's fully in control of your application, doesn't involve any host versioning or anything like that. We've also been adding support for various different integrations, such as durable application insights, giving you a lot more control from the worker side in terms of how logs are emitted from your application or the worker components themselves. I'll talk a little bit more about SDK types and ASP.NET Core integration as we go. This post was written shortly before we actually did GA ASP.NET Core integration, and that was one of the major things that we wanted to get done, to cover a large number of applications. With that, we basically have the HTTP trigger feels pretty much consistent across all of them, and SDK types bring in, for event-based triggers and input bindings, that same experience of using the Azure SDKs. So if you're wanting to, say, use a blob client for processing your trigger information, you actually want to control how that blob is processed, you have that flexibility and can just use the Azure SDK for .NET to do it. So with those, we have a lot of the same styles of functions and capabilities. There are some gaps here. We'll talk a little bit more about those as we go. The main note, though, is that for most apps, isolated is a good model. We do, generally speaking, recommend it. It's got a lot of strengths, and we think it is at scenario parity for most apps. Again, we'll talk more. So with that, we're also making some plans around .NET 8 and beyond. So we're intending for .NET 8 to be the last version that gets an in-proc model, the last LTS version. So we're normally getting LTS versions equals an in-process model update, whereas for both LTS and STS, we have the isolated worker model updates. So with .NET 8, we'll make that the last one for in-proc because we think that isolated is the better model, and so we want people to move towards that going forward. The way that's going to work is that we still are at .NET 8 release. You'll have isolated worker model support right there day one. But the in-process model will come slightly later. So we're going to try and make that as minimal as possible, but we do want to just make sure folks are aware that that's the case. You'll still have an option, though, for in-process .NET 8. I don't want folks thinking that they're not going to have that. But then as we go forward, we'll be shifting our attention more towards isolated. And so that's so that folks can actually leverage the advantages that that offers. And then we'll also be able to just build some really interesting things that were not really possible in the in-process model as well. So that's the general gist of what we've got for .NET 8. So look, the preview has started, and we'll talk a little bit more about where that is and those types of things. But then you'll see with the actual full release of .NET 8, we'll have isolated support in process to follow. The other thing to mention is just the remaining parity work. So there's two main features that are still cover scenarios. If you need these, then isolated isn't quite fully there for you yet. The big one is that service bus scenarios where you need message settlement, that's something that's coming extremely soon, we hope. So please look out for a preview of that in the near future. So that'll cover your scenarios where you need to do abandonment of a message that triggered your function, or other types of settlement actions. There's certainly plenty of folks out there who do depend on that from in-process model, and so if that is the case, please continue to do so. But for isolated, you should have a really nice option here soon. Similarly, we have durable entities. So we did already add durable functions support in general, but there's a specific pattern within that using stateful entities. And so stateful entities and durable functions are coming soon. We should have that out relatively soon. Again, if your app depends on that, you'll look forward to that preview. But if not, then if you don't use either of these scenarios, you should be good to go in terms of using isolated for any new projects and things like that. We'll talk a little bit more about upgrading and things like that if you want to. There's migration guides that are available in the documentation, and then we also have some nice support from .NET Upgrade Assistant to make things a little bit easier as well. So that's the general gist of the updates. I mean, the main points I really wanted to hit are, hey, isolated's really come a long way. We've added a lot of capabilities that address some of the main gaps. Still a couple more, but at this point, most apps should be perfectly happy. The other thing that was kind of, I may have skimmed over, was the performance stuff, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. But then, going forward, we're still looking forward to trying to make sure that, there's one recommended path and that folks are getting the best experience. We do really think there's a lot of nice advantages in isolated. So that's kind of how we're looking ahead to the future. Yeah, so with that, let's just jump over and talk through a couple of the other features. So I mentioned that shortly after that post went out, we got the GA out for ASP.NET Core integration. So this is really nice. This is where it's bringing in the various types that you're familiar with from your ASP.NET development. Makes your HTTP trigger a lot more friendly and you're able to leverage the skills you already have. Traditionally, in an isolated model, we've had the HTTP request data, HTTP response data projection, and those, while they work and they get you a long way, they're not the exact same. They have a few limitations in terms of message size, or request size, things like that. They don't support streaming payloads. All of that is accomplished using this ASP.NET Core integration. I did actually just want to really quickly show how that works. So we'll just pop over into VS. And if I take a look at this project, I have this ASP.NET Core extension package. Adding this is what's going to bring in that integration. And when I go to actually set up the program file and I do my host builder, let me actually make this a little bit bigger. Sorry about that. Instead of the normal registration here, we have this new configure functions web application. This is the signal to us to actually make sure that we leverage that and that we're using the alternate behavior that allows HTTP trigger to be powered by this. Now you can still use the function middleware support to help process some of these things. It's worth noting that we say ASP.NET Core integration. It's supporting these scenarios, but you're not getting the ASP.NET Core middleware pipeline itself. That's something that we've certainly heard feedback about and something we're very interested in expanding on in the future. And that is something that the isolated model should allow us to actually do. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to kind of bring in a little bit more richness from ASP.NET Core in the future. But for now, we do have the function middleware to help with some of that. And then as we'll see in the function, we're able to just use standard things like HTTP request, iAction result, all that good stuff. And in this kind of little, very quick demo scenario, I actually am also integrating the SDK type binding support. Now, this isn't an Azure SDK type, but we didn't have stream support before because of the way that processing works. And so this is actually being powered by the support in the Azure SDK for handling that stream. So what we have is a function that is going to just get a request just as a simple test type thing, and it's going to read a blob that I've specified, and then it's actually just going to stream that back. So we're using HTTP response streaming from the ASP.NET Core integration. And again, that's a really nice feature where you can sort of continue to write things back, do that well in advance of function execution if you want. But in this case, I'm just doing a nice simple file stream result. And all I'm doing is assigning one stream to the other, basically. So nice, elegant little function. And then, of course, we can just run this real quick. Oh, looks like I forgot to pre-build. But once we have that, perhaps, oh, that's classic right there. Yeah, this might be because I've been messing with my VS install. That's fine. Let me just do a quick abort and clean. Oh, that's why. Yeah. Sorry, this is not, this is indicative of me and how I've been setting up things recently, less the scenario. I think that should just be, we should be fine. This should move a little bit forward faster. Yeah, there we go. Okay, cool. And so now we'll just go ahead and hit this endpoint. And what we should see is that file gets streamed back to us as a download. So we'll go ahead and do that real quick. Now, because it's a larger file, it comes back, sort of incrementally. It'll take a little bit to download just because it's the download speed and the sort of some constraints on the machine itself. But what's nice is that I should have attached the profiler so you could see. But the memory usage of the function is minimal. Like that was a 212 megabyte download, but the actual function process is, I think 40 is what I remember seeing. It's really light because it's not actually doing anything with that data. It's not pulling that data fully into memory. It's just taking the stream and writing it back through. And so you may note that, hey, what is this? This is the installer for .NET 8. And again, we do now have .NET 8 support, and that's something that we're pretty excited about in general. The .NET 8 support is a bit limited. We want to call that out. So right now it's on Linux only. We're working on getting it onto Windows as soon as we can. The other thing is that, it's using, it was Preview 7. We're actually getting RC1 out the door right now. But this is, again, isolated only for now. We'll have in-proc as an option later. You'll just need to rev your packages to make sure they're on generally the latest versions and change your TFM in your project, and you should be good to go. With one caveat, you do need to make sure for now, while we're in the sort of .NET 8 preview SDK state, you'll need to make sure that you're using a preview version of VS. But this is really nice if you want to get started with it. There's a lot of exciting things in .NET 8, and we're really looking forward to the full release. As the preview goes, like I said, we should hopefully be lighting up all the Windows support and everything else as well. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about is performance and cold start. So this is another area that I think we have as sort of the parity for most apps and things like that. So this is preview support to provide a bit more optimization. It's actually pretty sizable. There's a few different things that are kind of rolled up into this as multiple previews. But in general, the isolated worker has performance characteristics that are still, we think, pretty good, but they can be much faster if you want to try some of these things out. The best place to get some of the details there is actually in the isolated process guide. This is sort of the main go-to document in our documentation set if you want to learn more about a lot of the features that we've been discussing, sort of how to wire them up and all that. And specifically, there's this performance optimization section. This is where we have the sort of details about a few of them. So first up is placeholders. This is a really nice bang for your buck. It does require, while it's in preview, a few extra setup steps that we will be removing as we go. But these are just necessary to get it into the preview state. And eventually this becomes just the silent default. Like, this is not a concept that we want you to have to deal with longer term, but for the purposes of making sure that it's an opt-in preview and that folks are able to sort of tune things, try them out, and provide us feedback, we wanted to go ahead and just kind of expose it a little bit more explicitly. So again, a few different configuration steps, but hopefully not too bad, and we'll be cutting them back as we go. The other thing is this optimized executor. This is just some stuff that's a lot lighter weight. It gets rid of some reflection and things like that that can occur for how things are wired up. So it certainly provides a nice benefit. Also fairly straightforward, just a quick project setting and then latest package version. So it's a little bit easier to set up. But that's another one that's really nice. And then also ready to run. You should always consider that. There's some trade-offs, I guess, but just in terms of you're targeting a specific version that may influence dependencies that you have or things like that. And then, there's some payload size implications sometimes. So certainly I would make sure, if you're not familiar with this, to check out the .NET General Ready to Run guidance. But this is something that can provide a good bit of performance benefit as well. So we're pretty pleased with how all these stack together. And like I said, more of this will become default as we go. So if you're looking to kind of pull more performance, and particularly around that cold start metric, there's a few different options here. And with those in place, and as we get those to GA, that really does light up a lot more. It makes it a lot easier for applications that you already have to consider looking at isolated. And to that end, I mentioned earlier Upgrade Assistant. This is just something that, like, to me, I wasn't fully even on my radar for .NET in general earlier on, and it's just such a nice tool that, like, no matter what project, even if you're not looking at functions, like, take a look at Upgrade Assistant. It's actually really nice. You get a nice sort of right-click upgrade experience that will help you do in-place project upgrades across .NET versions and with functions, getting you either to newer versions and the isolated model. So in this case, it was a .NET 7 project, so all I have is the .NET 8 preview. But if you're using older versions, it'll provide some of the other LTS and STS versions that are available. So if I was coming from an older, potentially deprecated version of .NET, I would see 6 and 7 here as well. But it's really nice. It'll kind of walk you through all the different changes that it'll make. It does it in a way that plays really nicely with source control. It's just a handy way of sort of moving forward and making sure that most of the common types of changes and things like that are handled for you. It still might have some build errors and things like that at the end, because there might be something that you need to make a decision on or do. So it's not doing everything, but it gets you so much of the way there. It's really handy. And this is available as an extension to Visual Studio, but really handy even for non-functions projects, just getting them to the latest .NET versions, take your ASP.NET Core projects forward, all that good stuff. Really highly recommend that folks look at this. But the function support is especially relevant to this conversation. And of course, with all of this, we're looking for feedback on these previews as we go. We want to make sure that everything is meeting y'all's needs. And if there are additional gaps, barriers to adopting isolated, issues you're having with our new .NET 8 integration or anything like that, the worker GitHub repo is absolutely the place to go. You can always go file an issue for anything that seems amiss or where you have a feature request. Team's pretty responsive there. We want to make sure that we get to as many of those as we can. So please let us know how things are working. Feel free to also just, if things are like something you like, that's always great feedback as well. But particularly if there's something that is a gap or something like that, we want to make sure we're patching those up, because we do think that this is a really nice model, and it's sort of the future for functions on .NET. So with that, do just want to jump back to some slideware real quick, and then we will be able to maybe take some more questions, things like that. I mentioned that there's some of these benefits of the isolated model. That's something that we're very pleased with. We really do see a lot of success when folks are using it. And some of the recent features really help make it shine and make it, again, cover those scenarios that folks have needed from InProc as well. There's a bunch of mechanical changes too. I mean, the dependency injection model is much more refined. I can't overemphasize the reliability stuff and the fact that you're owning main and your dependencies. That the unification, collision things of the past are not as not something you have to worry about. It also is just generally aligned to the .NET ecosystem a lot better. We're able to leverage a lot more of sort of what the community has, what they're used to, and sort of those types of things. We're overall really pleased with it. It's something that is very much worth a look, especially if you haven't taken a look at it in a while. The other thing is, again, I really think Upgrade Assistant is magic, and everybody should be using it always, especially as we're looking at the .NET 8 release and things like that. With that, that's all the planned content I had to cover, and I really just want to maybe go through any questions or things like that folks have. Yeah. And again, if we don't get to questions and things like that here, that's where feel free to file an issue on GitHub. That's a perfect place.
Thanks, Matthew. There are two questions that I think the audience has asked. One is if there are plans to support Azure Functions on Arch 64.
I think I would want to know the context of that, because that probably refers to images that we expose. And I don't remember the Linux-based image plans. So I'm not 100% certain there. In general, we do expose the Docker-based images and all the stuff that goes into those. That's another thing that we have open source on GitHub. So if you do have a workload where you really need to target that, it could be done. I just don't know if there are any plans for us officially releasing those types of things.
Hope that answers your question. The next one is Azure Functions AOT for timeline, if I'm understanding right.
Right. So AOT is ahead of time compilation. That's something that we've been talking a good bit about with the .NET team. In practice, you can absolutely do some things around it. It does have some trade-offs. One is AOT is, it only works for certain scenarios. There are some things that the .NET team says, hey, man, this is not a place where AOT should really be used. But also, more saliently, it really does make the package size larger. Your deployment payload does become a good bit larger, and that can have some pretty nasty side effects in terms of cold start and just paging everything in. So we've seen some mixed results with it. It's certainly something you can do, but it is going to have some limitations. We're still exploring. I just don't have any to the question of when. I don't have anything that's like super concrete. We are using AOT behind the scenes in a few places to help where we know where we can, but it's sort of at the moment a very sort of tactical deployment of those. But yeah, I think we want to make sure that it's available. And hey, I'd love to understand, sort of what you're looking for out of AOT and sort of what the scenarios are. I'm assuming it's mostly perf related, but the size of the payloads does seem to counteract that in some cases. For functions workloads where we're spinning them up and discarding them so aggressively. That said, hey, it's it's something that we can certainly expand on, and I'm again looking forward to .NET 8 because I think a lot of things are. I think AOT is even better than that. It's better there on some of this stuff. I believe the payload side's actually reduced a bit. I have to double check on it, but yeah, overall, it's certainly a cool technology that we're hoping to have folks leverage more. Okay, so the scenario, I just saw the chat pop up. So yeah, deploying functions with container apps with AOT. Yeah, totally makes sense. That's something that I'm thinking should be doable. Yeah, you'll just need to make sure that when in the base image, everything's set up, but then your payload would just need to be AOT set up. Yeah, something to do. And the functions on container apps today, you have that. Just take our image and throw it in there fairly easily. And there's also some other stuff. Yeah, it hopefully should reduce cold start time as long as you're not dealing with transfer. So like pulling your image from the registry is the place that would be impacted. But like once it's there, once it's cached and ready to go, yeah, it's really nice.
All right. I don't see any other questions. So I do realize that we showed multiple links throughout the session. So if you didn't catch all of them, this newsletter link would be one to catch, and that's where you can find all of the links that we shared and all of the announcements about the updates for today. And I think with that, we can end the session for today. Thanks everyone for joining and for your questions. Hope to see you again in the next month's community stand-up. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.